There are two versions of Godzilla. There's Godzilla, the pop culture icon, the monster who fights King Ghidorah, the monster who teams up with Kong, the monster who has fought superheroes, aliens, robots, gods, and basically anything unfortunate enough to wander into its path. The Godzilla who, somewhere along the way, became someone we actually root for. And then, there's Gojira. And Gojira isn't here to save anybody. Because in 1954, Godzilla wasn't really a superhero. He wasn't even really a character in the way we understand him today. He was a nightmare. A walking reminder of something Japan had experienced less than a decade earlier. Nuclear destruction. And that is what makes IDW's The Horror of Godzilla Issue 1 so interesting. Because this comic seems to understand something that occasionally gets lost underneath 70 years of sequels, crossovers, merchandise, and monster fights. Godzilla is scary, or at least he should be. And The Horror of Godzilla wants us to remember why. This ain't Godzilla, this is Gojira. To understand why this first issue works so well, you really have to go back to the very beginning. The original Godzilla in 1954 is fundamentally different from the one that we know today. That film isn't really about watching two giant monsters punch each other, it's about watching something unstoppable approach. Godzilla emerges from the sea as the almost unknowable consequence of mankind's actions, and importantly, the horror isn't limited to Godzilla himself, it's what follows him. Radiation, destroyed cities, burnt bodies, hospitals overflowing with casualties, families separated, children crying. There's an incredibly bleak quality to that original film, because Godzilla isn't simply destroying buildings, he represents the consequences of destruction continuing long after the initial explosion. And that's something The Horror of Godzilla seems fascinated by. Because the terrifying thing in this comic isn't simply what happens when Godzilla attacks, it's what happens after Godzilla has passed through. And IDW gives us a wonderful strange answer. It rains. This is probably the biggest idea introduced within the first issue. Godzilla's presence seemingly brings with it this strange rain. And that rain is doing something to the people. It's changing them, transforming them, turning ordinary human beings into monsters. And I'll admit, on paper, that could be incredibly silly. Godzilla makes monster rain sounds like one of the sillier ideas within the character's history. But within the horror atmosphere of this comic, I actually think it's fascinating. Because it takes one of the central ideas behind the original Godzilla and translates it into something new. The original Gojira was inseparable from the anxiety surrounding nuclear weapons and radiation. Godzilla himself effectively born from humanity playing with forces it couldn't control. And radiation is terrifying partly because it's invisible. You can survive an explosion. You can survive destruction. You can look around and believe the danger has passed, but something can remain. Something can be carried through the environment, through the water, through the soil, through your own body. And the horror of Godzilla appears to be playing with that idea through the rain. Godzilla doesn't simply arrive, destroy something and leave. He contaminates the world around him. His presence changes nature itself. The sky becomes dangerous. And suddenly, this enormous monster isn't the only thing you have to fear. The environment has become part of Godzilla. That's a really interesting extension of what Godzilla had traditionally represented. But the comic goes one step further, because the rain doesn't simply kill the people through radiation. Like I said, it changes them. Humans begin becoming monsters themselves. And this is where I'm probably most curious to see where the series goes. Because there's several ways you could interpret this. Maybe it's simply a new piece of Godzilla mythology. Godzilla has altered the natural world so dramatically that humanity is beginning to mutate around him. But thematically, there's something much more interesting going on. Because Godzilla has always been humanity's monster, we created the conditions that produced him, our weapons, our wars, our arrogance, and now, through Godzilla, humanity is literally becoming monstrous itself. There's something almost cynical about that. Man creates the bomb creates Godzilla, and Godzilla creates monsters out of man. That's a fascinating evolution of nuclear metaphor, and yes, it could become ridiculous. This is the kind of concept where execution is everything. If suddenly we've got hundreds of colour-free mutant superheroes running around fighting Godzilla, then maybe we've lost what makes the first issue so effective. But right now, it feels disturbing, and more importantly, it feels mysterious. We don't completely understand what is happening. We don't know exactly what the rules are, and the horror thrives on that uncertainty. So I'm interested to see how IDW develops this idea. Because if they can maintain this tone, this could become a really interesting new layer of Godzilla lore. But the real centerpiece of this comic isn't necessarily the story, it's the art. Because the artwork understands the assignment immediately. Godzilla isn't presented like a superhero. He's not posing. He's not waiting for a big splash page where everyone cheers because Godzilla has arrived to fight the big bad monster. He's presented like something out of a nightmare. There's a difference. One of the easiest traps to fall into with Godzilla is making him too familiar. We've seen this creature 1,000 times. We know the silhouette, we know the war, we know the atomic breath. We got toys of him sitting on our shelves, we've played him as video games, we've watched him fight dozens and dozens of monsters. So how do you make Godzilla frightening again? You stop treating him like someone we've known for 70 years. And you start treating him like the people inside this world would see him. Imagine actually seeing Godzilla, not from the safety of a cinema or not a cool splash page. You're standing on the street, and somewhere through the rain and smoke is something impossibly large. You can't completely see it. You don't understand it. Maybe you see the outline first. Maybe the spines, maybe a glimpse of its face, and suddenly you realise that thing is alive, and it's coming towards you. That's where the artwork of the horror of Godzilla shines. Godzilla feels enormous, but most importantly, he feels wrong. It's like something that shouldn't exist. And that's probably my favourite thing about this first issue. It doesn't feel like the cuddly pop culture Godzilla. This isn't even necessarily the modern blockbuster Godzilla who arrived and makes you want to stand up and cheer. This is something closer to that original creature. Something unknowable, something angry, something tragic. This ain't Godzilla, it's Gojira. And I know technically they are the same character, but culturally, I think Godzilla fans understand what that distinction means. Godzilla has become an icon. Gojira reminds you of the monster of 1954, the walking nuclear nightmare. And this comic understands that Godzilla doesn't necessarily need another monster standing opposite him to create tension. Godzilla himself should be enough. A footstep should be terrifying. A silhouette should be terrifying. Seeing those dorsal plates through darkness should be terrifying. Because when you're a human being standing beneath him, Godzilla isn't a character, he's a disaster. And that's another thing the artwork gets right. Scale. Kaiju stories live or die on scale. It's not enough to draw Godzilla bigger than humans. We need to understand how completely insignificant those humans are compared to him. The best Godzilla imagery makes you imagine looking upwards, and upwards, and upwards, until you reach his face. That's horror. Because what exactly are you supposed to do against that? You can't fight it, you can't reason with it, you probably can't even get its attention. You are essentially an insect watching a hurricane decide where it's going next. And combining that sense of scale with the rain gives this book an oppressive atmosphere. Godzilla dominates the world even when he isn't directly attacking someone. His influence is everywhere. The weather, the environment, the people, the monsters they are becoming. Godzilla doesn't simply occupy a panel, he hangs over the entire comic. And that's exactly how he should feel. I also think this book arrives at an interesting point in Godzilla history, because we've all become very comfortable with Godzilla. And don't get me wrong, I love heroic Godzilla. I love the monster battles. I love watching Godzilla throw another kaiju through a building. There's room for that. That's part of what has allowed this character to survive for more than 70 years. Godzilla can almost be anything. Hero, villain, anti-hero, force of nature, protector, destroyer. But sometimes it's worth stripping all of that away. No monster-first mythology, no wrestling matches, no giant robots, no team-ups. Just ordinary people looking up and seeing Godzilla. And suddenly you remember what a terrifying concept this actually is. A prehistoric nuclear abomination walks out of the ocean. Human weapons can barely hurt it. Cities disappear beneath its feet. Radiation follows wherever it goes. And now, in this story, even rain falling from the sky might transform you into something horrible. That's Godzilla horror. And going back to the monster transformation, that's why I think this idea has potential. Because the horror of Godzilla isn't simply copying 1954. That would be the easy approach. Darken artwork, put Godzilla in the shadows, reference Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Done. But this book is trying to take the fundamental anxiety behind Godzilla and create something new from it. The bomb isn't simply an explosion, it's consequences, it's contamination, it's mutation. It's wondering whether something mankind unleashed can truly ever be contained again. Godzilla was one consequence. Perhaps these transformations are another. And suddenly, the title, The Horror of Godzilla, takes on another meaning. The horror isn't simply Godzilla himself, it's the horror that spreads from him. From what he leaves behind, what happens to the world simply because this creature exists. That's a genuinely interesting direction. So as a first issue, The Horror of Godzilla has absolutely got my attention. It's got my attention so much that I've diverted from my normal Marvel history content and I wanted to talk about it. Not because it reinvented Godzilla completely, but because it's remembered something incredibly important about him. Before the monster cinematic universe, before Godzilla became one of the most recognizable fictional characters on Earth, there was a monster emerging from the ocean in post-war Japan, and he was terrifying. The artwork, the rain and the human transformations give this series its own identity while still connecting beautifully to the nuclear anxieties that created Godzilla within the first place. Could this idea become silly? Absolutely. But that's what makes me interested, because right now, rather than feeling like a random monster mythology, it feels like an extension of Godzilla's original metaphor. Radiation doesn't stop being dangerous because the explosion is over, and apparently, neither does Godzilla. But above everything else, like I mentioned, it's the artwork that sells this book. Godzilla hasn't looked this frightening in a long time. The scale, the darkness, the atmosphere, the way he's framed less like a protagonist and more like something you desperately hope doesn't notice you. It reminds us why this creature frightened audiences within the first place. And if the horror of Godzilla maintains that atmosphere while developing the mystery surrounding the rain and the transformations, IDW could have something genuinely special here, because sometimes Godzilla doesn't need to fight another monster. Sometimes he doesn't need to save humanity. Sometimes he doesn't even need to be the character we're following. Sometimes, Godzilla just needs to appear on the horizon, and we need to be reminded that we should probably be running, because this ain't Godzilla. This is Gojira.